Hello and welcome everybody. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to go over a few Zoom tips for you to use tonight. The first is that closed captions have been made available for this meeting, and you can turn them on by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen, and then you can adapt your subtitle settings there as well. You have been muted so that we don't have any background noise, but we do want to hear from you. So we invite you to use the chat box to introduce yourself, and then later on in the meeting to add any questions or comments that you have in there. This meeting has been recorded so that we can send it out with you after. We are going to be recording the active speaker. However, if you do feel more comfortable, you can turn your video off. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Melissa.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited that everybody's here. I know it's a busy time of year, and we're super grateful that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to join us here tonight. Hopefully we can bring some value to you. So to start tonight, we think it's appropriate that we take a moment to acknowledge the residential school atrocity that's been unfolding in the province over the past few weeks. It's absolutely horrifying, and our hearts are heavy, and we grieve the losses with the Indigenous community. So please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to turn this over to Mike Bockwell of the Wellington Water Watchers to get things rolling for the evening.
Thank you, Melissa. The meeting tonight is an update meeting. You've maybe read in the media recently about the result of what's called the report of the closed meeting investigator. And in a moment, Mike Sullivan is going to provide us with an update around that. He's also going to update us on the status of the MZO. And then Jamie Gibb is going to update us on the status of the annexed land and the possibility of it being returned to be unannexed. Following that, there's a bit of a celebration we're going to do here. There's some things we want to, that we have some distance from it. There's some things I'd like to say to you and to congratulate you in the community on behalf of the Water Watchers. And we're going to describe to you the Pay It Forward program that we have and how the Pay It Forward program benefited you, and ask you to make a contribution to the Pay It Forward fund to support other communities who one day will be in the situation that you were in. And finally, there's a survey that we circulated, and we're going to share the survey results and begin the conversation about the future of Get Concerned Stratford. As is our usual practice, after every speaker, we'll take questions. We invite you to pose your questions in the chat box as the conversation proceeds. We'll be sure and answer every question. As Megan said at the beginning, we invite you to enter to say hello in the chat box now as we're getting started. Introduce yourself. Tell us how you're doing. And let's keep talking through the chat box as the meeting goes on. As you know, I always like to say, are we at the same meeting? I hope we're at the same meeting. And I'm going to ask Mike Sullivan to come on to the virtual stage and update us on the results of the the results of the report of the closed meeting investigator. Are you there, Mike?
I am here. Thank you very much, Mike. The City of Stratford, as many of you know, and if I could have the first slide up, please, acted in a very undemocratic way. They knew about what they were planning back in the summer and fall of 2018, but didn't tell anything to the rest of the city. And they did that in large measure by holding what they call closed meetings, or meetings that weren't open to the public, meetings that are called in camera. Can I have the next slide, please? And as a result, everything that the city did was in secret to the public from the summer of 2018 until the announcement by Invest Stratford sometime in the fall of 2020 that this project was going forward, and the notice by the city that they were going to spend $12 million on, or $18 million on infrastructure, $6 million of which was going to come from you, the taxpayers. And so as a result, they had to come out of the hiding, as it were, and not be in camera. The Municipal Act, Section 239, says that except as provided in this section, all meetings shall be open to the public. Next slide. The exceptions are for 11 different reasons, 11 herbs and spices, as it were, that are attached to how they can hide things from the public. And they are things like security of property, personal matters about identifiable individuals, acquisition of land, litigation, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, which they used lots and lots of the time, matters that they can hold a closed meeting under another act, if the province gives them secret information, a trade secret of scientific, technical, commercial, or financial, or a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to negotiations. Those are the only reasons they can hide from you. And this council has become very adept at sliding its discussions into those categories. Next slide, please. So then in the fall of 2020, the Beacon Herald ran a story that noted that the mayor, in fact, asked the province for the ministerial zoning order to zone the land aside from a public process, to take the citizens out of the process of zoning the land for Xinyi. Now, the mayor had hinted that this was a provincial thing, and the province was in the news a lot because there'd been a lot of these MZOs, and the mayor was quite willing to leave it to the public's imagination that somehow this was being forced upon the city of Stratford by the province. No, 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 not so. The Beacon Herald phoned the province gave them copies of the letters that the mayor himself had written seeking the ministerial zoning order from the province, starting in November of 2018. Realizing that this was actually coming from the city, I said, well, when did the council decide this? And I looked at all the minutes and all the agendas of the 200 odd meetings of city council between November of 2018 and November of 2020. And there was no record of any discussion by council of an MZO, nothing. I looked in the regular council minutes, looked in the agendas, because that's all you really get to see, of the closed meetings, the meetings that were closed to the public, and there was nothing about an MZO. I asked the clerk, can you tell me what meeting it was that council gave the mayor permission to seek the MZO? The clerk said, ask the chief administrative officer. I phoned and wrote to the chief administrative officer. She still hasn't replied to my request. So there's been no indication from anybody in the city when it happened. So I filed a complaint on behalf of Get Concerned Stratford that the meetings were being held in camera improperly. Now, there were two reasons for my complaint. One was you can't tell from the agendas what it is they are meeting about. All they do in the agenda is list word for word one of the 11 exceptions that you saw on the previous page. They don't put any detail whatsoever, and that's against the law. The law requires them to give the general nature of the item that's being discussed, not just the exception. Next slide, please. In my complaint, I asked that all 75 meetings be examined for reference to an MZO, because you can't tell from looking at the agenda or the minutes as they were what topic they're discussing. It all it says is this item is subject to solicitor-client privilege, or this item has to do with an identifiable person, or this item has to do with negotiations. Nothing. There was nothing about what it is, what the topic was. And the law requires them to do that, and their own bylaws require them to do that, to identify the topic. So when you file a complaint, you file it to the city. The city refers the complaint to a company called Local Administrative Services, which is an arm of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. And the Ombudsman has given cities the permission to do this. The LAS then hired Berlis, who is a big law firm in Toronto. The city also uses Berlis from time to time for legal matters representing the city. And then Berlis assigned a young man named John Pappas to be the investigator. He wrote back about 2 weeks after getting my complaint saying, it's too broad. You asked me to look at 75 meetings. I'm not going to look at 75 meetings. I said to him, look, you then tell me which one discussed the MZO, because I certainly can't. And he and I discussed it, and we settled on he would look at the 3 meetings prior to the first letter from the mayor. Next slide, please. He did that. He wrote a report. The city got a draft of the report in April. They got the final report in early May. The law, which is section 239.2 of the Act, says that report and recommendations, the investigator, if he's of the opinion that something was awry, he writes a report, and he reports it to the municipality and the reasons for it, and then makes recommendations. And he did that, and we were aware that he had done that. The law requires the to ensure that the reports received under subsection 10 are made available to the public. So as soon as I knew that the city actually had a report, I phoned the city clerk and said I'd like a copy. And I got an answer back from the city clerk that was just baffling. They said, the law requires us to release the report, but it doesn't say when we have to release the report. So the city was taking the position that they could sit on the report forever because the law was silent on when they had to release it, which makes a mockery of the law. And I have complained to our member of provincial parliament and asked him to raise this issue with the minister. Then once they have a report, and you only get a report if you've done something wrong, then the municipality has to pass a resolution stating how it intends to address the report. So what are they going to do to fix it? Next slide, please. And in his report, he found 3 violations by the city. First, he examined the 3 meetings that were prior to the mayor's first letter to the minister, and discovered that the mayor had discussed a proposal by a large company to spend a lot of money and invest in Stratford. And he discussed that under the aegis of an exception called solicitor-client privilege. But Mr. Pappas discovered that there was no solicitor-client privilege. Not only was there no questions asked of the lawyer, but the lawyer made no comment whatsoever on this report. So the mayor, by discussing the Xinyi proposal in council, in camera, acted outside the law. That item should have been discussed in public. He was asked by me to investigate what meeting when did the MZO get discussed by council? And he did not find that the MZO had ever been discussed by council prior to the mayor's first letter. It was not in any of the closed meetings. The second violation by the city was that the city was in the habit of failing to disclose the nature of the topic being discussed. And this is he found that it's in violation of the Act and of the city's own procedural bylaw. The Act requires that the city give the general nature of the topic being discussed. So if they're discussing a property at 1871 Ontario Street, they have to identify that they're discussing a property at 1871 Ontario Street, and that is all the information that's needed. They don't have to say more than that. They don't have to say why they're discussing it, but you have to know what it is they're discussing. And then third, the city is under an obligation under its own bylaw, to report out after each of these closed meetings. What that means is they summarize what they discussed and what actions they took. And part of the reason for that is because it's a requirement under the law that if there is a vote taken on a bylaw or a resolution, that has to be in the public. So they report out what they've discussed, or again, in the report out, all they do is list the exception. They quote it word for word from the Act, and then say, on this topic, direction was given, because they don't have to say what they've done. They just have to say direction was given, which means, for example, that they are in the midst of negotiations with one of the unions, and the topic comes up of bargaining in a closed meeting, which is an appropriate subject for a closed meeting. And the city learns of the union's position and the city's position and gives direction to its negotiators. That's all above board to be in camera. What's not above board to be in camera is to conduct a vote on a resolution or on a bylaw in camera. And I don't know if they've done that, but one would have to wonder, given all the things that took place over the past 2.5 years that were in secret. Next slide, please. The city's response. Now, the city is obligated to make it public, and I will note for you that they made it public after the press made it public. So the press, I don't know who would have called the press, but somebody called the press and told them the city has this report and it's got, it's found violations of the law, but the city is sitting on it. And the press then, I don't know if they forced this, whether the city was going to do it anyway, I don't know, but the city did release the report on the Friday of the week the press made an issue of it. So, but they'd had the report, they'd had the draft for 2 months, and they'd had the final of the report for at least a month, and they'd done nothing. They had not acted on it at all. The motion that the council was asked to vote on was a motion put together by the CAO and the clerk. And all it said was, we're going to get some training for council so they know when things are supposed to be in camera. And in the future, we will, in quotes, when necessary, close quotes, identify the general nature of the topic being discussed in the agenda and the report out. So what happened to the last 100 or so meetings that were closed to the public and were in violation? More than that, because they apparently have been doing this since 2015. Prior to 2015, they did it just fine, but since 2015, they only quote the words of the Act. So several councillors spoke up on this issue and requested that the CAO look into the cost or the ability of council to retroactively release the general nature of the topics they were discussing for the previous 72 meetings. Now, the closed meeting investigator made an interesting point. He got to see the actual minutes of these closed meetings, and he referred to one of them, and basically the minute is, It's a bigger discussion. It's a bigger topic name, so it will say something like property at 1875 Ontario Street as the title. And what he said was those minutes could be the agenda because they actually describe, without revealing any of the discussion, they describe in the general nature of the topic being discussed. And so the closed meeting investigator gave him a big broad hint. And he said, all they need to do is publish their minutes. And then they've covered their obligation under the law. So the other issue that hasn't been dealt with, and one of the counselors asked them to see if they have access to a different lawyer, and there were some gasps on council when he asked that, to give them advice on which items that they discussed in camera that they shouldn't have been discussing in camera, such as the MZO, can be revealed to the public as having been discussed, and the discussions can be revealed. And so the CAO and the clerk, I guess, are going back, and tomorrow we'll know whether or not they come up with another recommendation in terms of a city resolution about how they should proceed. Council did vote to accept the resolution that had been put forward, but council asked for more. So we'll see what happens when we see the agenda for Monday's meeting tomorrow. Next slide, please. The other issue that comes out of this is the fact that the mayor acted on his own. It was clear from the report of the investigator, who was looking for discussions of the MZO, that he did not find any discussions of the MZO in any of the 3 meetings prior to the mayor actually asking for one. All he found was the mayor giving council a briefing on Xinyi, but there was no discussion of an MZO. That happened entirely at the mayor's own instinct. The mayor did it all by himself. And so he did not do it with the direction of council. There was no direction given because there was no discussion on an MZO. I don't know where he got the idea for an MZO. Whether or not he certainly wasn't being pressured by the minister, because the ministry actually turned him down at first. But the mayor clearly was acting without the direction of council. It's true that it was an election year, but that doesn't mean that council doesn't act. Council still acts, but they don't have a full council meeting again after the election until the first week of December. So we don't know, because the closed meeting investigator didn't go that far forward, whether or not council retroactively okayed the mayor asking for an MZO. He may have asked, but we don't know, because there's still no indication of which meetings the MZO was discussed at. Next slide, please. This is, again, for the future. Council asked the CAO to look at the past actions. They suggested using a different lawyer. But Get Concerned Stratford is also still awaiting answers on freedom of information requests. There are other parties who have filed freedom of information requests and have been turned down. One of them, quite bafflingly, was turned down on the basis, this was an ask for a report from a consultant, a planning consultant. You may have heard of the name Chris Pigeon. He wrote a report in early 2018 about, or maybe it was 2019. Anyway, he wrote a report about annexation and a ministerial zoning order. And so far, nobody's seen that report. And the reason that the city gave for hiding it was that the report wasn't given to the city, it was given to their legal counsel. So this is the length to which this council will go to keep things secret, is they ask consultants that rather than give it to the give a report to the department that asked for it, give it to our legal counsel so we can hide it from the public. That's just shameful. And I'm hoping that eventually we're going to see that report. the other thing is, if there is no revealing of the general nature of the discussions that comes as a result of the council's request to the CAO and the clerk to give them a different motion to vote on. If that doesn't happen, I'm going to go back to the closed meeting investigator process and say, okay, council didn't tell me which meeting they discussed the MZO at. So you get to look at 75 meetings and tell me which one, or more than one, council discussed the MZO at. The minister himself has said that these things should be discussed in an open public meeting, and it has to be voted on by council. So Stratford, if Stratford did that, if they did it in an open meeting, there's no minutes. And if there was a vote to ask, that didn't happen under the law, because the vote has to happen in public meetings. So we'll see what happens in the next few weeks, and we'll decide then whether we ask for another discussion or another investigation by a closed meeting investigator, because it's certainly not clear. So that's where we're at. It's certainly not ideal, but it's a veil of secrecy is being lifted over the city of Stratford's processes since 2018. And we'll just keep peeling at that onion until we can see the many layers of secrecy and try and get to the bottom of exactly how this all happened. Thank you very much, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mike. You're being a real bulldog on this, and I'm just trying to reconcile the picture of a bulldog peeling an onion. You know, somehow that's what you're doing for us. And as you peel the onion, you're somehow managing not to cry. I think that's a feat in itself. Now, Mike, there's several questions I'm going to ask you. Some of them, these questions may seem like rhetorical questions to you, and you may say in response to the questioner, yeah, I have the same question, but here we go. It just seems, Jane says, it just seems that there had to be a reason for all this secrecy. What is that reason, all the way along by the mayor and the staff? What, Mike, why this secrecy? What do you think?
I think that they were given advice by Chris Pidgeon to do this in secret after his experience with Guelph Hermosa Township. That process was done not in secret, and that process did not exercise the MZO option. So he was turned down in Guelph Hermosa Township because too many of the details became public. And quite frankly, the citizens of Guelph Hermosa said no. And Pidgeon realized, well, I'm never going to get anywhere at Stratford if the public knows what we're doing. So we got to keep it secret. We got to keep it secret so the public doesn't know. And we have to seek a ministerial zoning order. I'm willing to bet that the mayor's letter to the minister seeking a ministerial zoning order was the first request of many, many requests, and that Stratford led the world on this undemocratic tool. So that's why I think, but I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask mayor and councillors, and maybe somebody in camera said why we have to keep this a secret. I certainly am glad that the council did come up for air when they had to vote on a $6 million cost, because if they hadn't, we might be looking at shovels in the ground.
Mike, the follow-up question from Jane is, and I think this is a question many people are thinking about, is there any consequence to this report?
At election time, maybe, but there are no penalties in the act for a council violating the act on a repeated basis. So there's no, it's up to us to keep the pressure on, but ultimately, if you don't like the job that your councillor or your mayor is doing, then don't give them the job again. And so that's the ultimate consequence, as it were. But in terms of the act, they get a public shaming, and then it's business as usual.
Mike, I'm going to blend a couple of questions here together. They're on the same theme. And one question from Richard is, how is it in any way, shape, or form appropriate that council investigates itself? And the corollary to that is, how can Berlis be the law firm that examines the in-camera meetings when they also represent the city? They're kind of related. What do you say?
Yeah. A very wise person told me, if it looks like a conflict, then that's enough. It doesn't have to be a conflict. It just has to look like a conflict. And the public then can't trust what you're doing. I too have doubts about the use of aired Berlis, but and I in fact sought the advice of another lawyer about that issue, and that other lawyer suggested to me, and please don't take this as some kind of a racist comment, but that the law firms set up what they call a Chinese wall between portions of the firm that are acting in opposition to other portions of the firm. So in theory, Mr. Pappas and his bosses would never work for the city of Stratford. Other portions of the firm would. But if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and acts like a duck and quacks like a duck, you wonder, is it a duck? And so I'm not 100% happy, but it's the system we have. So this is what we have to live with.
And Mike, that's the aired Berlis part of the question. What about the, is it, and again, this could be rhetorical, is it in any way, shape, or form appropriate that council investigates itself?
In theory, council did not investigate itself. The report, the original request for the closed meeting investigation did go to the city, but the process that's been set up is intended to be at an arm's length, so that the city is no longer in charge of that process. And the fact that Pappas came up with more violations than I asked for is some indication that he was acting with integrity and was actually looking hard at what council was up to. I didn't ask the closed meeting investigator to find an example of where the council was using solicitor-client privilege to hide a Xinyi discussion. I asked him for a discussion of the MZO. On his own, he discovered that the mayor's briefing of council was in fact in violation of the act, because it should have been discussed in the open portion of the council meeting. And when now all of the councilors and the mayor said they'd never seen the report. So somebody at the city got the draft. You can bet your bottom dollar they were briefed on it, even if they hadn't seen it. So when they saw it, they complained that Mr. Pappas had not considered the other exception in the act, that it had to do with a plan or report or a that was involved in negotiations, because it was their intention in the future to negotiate with Xinyi. And he said, but you didn't have a plan then. And you have to have the plan then to have the exception in the act. So the fact that you were maybe going to have a plan in the future doesn't give you the right to that exception. And so he rejected their argument that it should have been in a closed meeting for another reason. So I think he was pretty thorough. He did suggest that any councillor has to do to get something listed as closed is just ask the lawyer a question about it. But I think that doesn't go to solicitor-client privilege, and that would be challengeable.
Thank you, Mike. There's this very specific question here from Jillian, and you may not be able to answer it. And if you're not, then maybe Jillian will have to give us some additional information, and maybe you can answer in the chat box. But the question is, did Mayor Matheson seek an MZO prior or after the virtual meeting held with 400 mayors of Ontario and Bill Gates?
Well, he asked on November 18th. So when was the meeting with Bill Gates? Because I don't know.
So Jillian, add some information in the chat box, and when Mike gets off the stage, he'll see what he can do to answer that. There's a lot of love for you in the chat box, Mike, a lot of thank yous, some more comments. This one from Bob, and again, people may have to answer in the chat box, but we'll put the question to you anyway, Mike. Does anybody know if this is the same type of boondoggle and lawyering up that has prevented development of the Cooper site?
I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, so there's lots of comments in the chat box. There are persistent calls for you to run for city council, Mike, and this may be the time when you want to tell everybody that you're not going to do that. But there's still a lot of love for you in the chat box.
Thank you to everybody.
And Mike,
and I don't like living alone, so I'm probably not running for anything.
and while we have you on the virtual stage, will you just update us on the status of the MZO?
So one of the things I did was to phone Mr. Pettipiece's office when I heard that the city was not going to release the report, because I wanted his office to ask the minister to force him to release the report. And I didn't get any response. I left messages, got nothing. So on the day that I was going to speak to council, I phoned Pettipiece's office and said, oh, by the way, I'm going to tell people that I got nothing from you. Is that how you want me to leave it? Sure enough, I heard back. I heard back within about an hour of leaving that message. And he told me two things. One, he thought I was phoning about the MZO, and he said, don't worry, the minister is busy with a bunch of other things, but he intends to revoke that MZO, and he's just taking his time doing it, but don't worry, it's going to happen. And the other thing he told me was that he would speak to the minister about the city's decision to not release the report as soon as they got it.
Thank you, Mike. And again, I hope you'll take a little bit of time to read what's in the chat box. There's a lot of appreciation for your hard work there.
Thank you.
Jamie, can we invite Jamie Gibb to the virtual stage? And Jamie's going to update us on the status of the annexation.
All right. Mike, how many minutes did you budget for me on this annexation topic?
We're not rushing you, Mike. Or sorry, we're not rushing you, Jamie. Take the time you need.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So Mike wanted me to spend whatever amount of time revisiting the annexation of February 2020 and where it currently stands to the best of my knowledge today. But I thought first I might paint a picture. The Van Ness and the Welch lands that have been annexed, they aren't just sitting there quietly waiting to become a future industrial park. Right now they're growing food. Edible bean crops are in the ground, and most likely it's going to be navy beans and or black turtle beans that are harvested in the fall. It's also an active living environment out there. Carbon sequestration is going on for just one example. And perhaps the time is here for us to look at matching up current environmental problems with some of the opportunities that farmland provides. I'm thinking that at some point in the future, farmland will hopefully be viewed as being as precious as groundwater. Anyways, the previous community meetings, we have mentioned that the connection with the annexation of Xinyi, they fit hand in glove. Xinyi was almost certainly not going to arrive in Stratford without the annexation occurring. And the annexation didn't need to occur without Xinyi coming to town. So at the January 16th, 2020 public meeting, it became apparent that documentation supporting the annexation was in short supply, and that getting satisfactory answers to questions was going to prove to be difficult. So at that point, I hired a planning consultant, EB Growth Management, and I did that to help find the information that I was going to need to make informed comments. 2 weeks after the hire, Kevin Evie produced a 21-page document, which essentially, I had no idea at the beginning, but essentially it turned out to be a peer review of the planning justification report that they had brought forward. And to summarize the 21 pages, the conclusion was that no justification for the proposed annexation exists under the provisions of the provincial policy statement. And of course, we all know in hindsight that the justification was that Xinyi was waiting waiting on the sidelines. Now, additionally, at that time, my report said that it was reasonably approximated that the city, before annexation, could accommodate 39 years of industrial growth on its existing inventory. And this increased to 91 years if annexation lands were to be included. So we move up to the present. The Van Ness family, they're the family who own the land that the Xinyi plant would have been located on. They wrote a letter to Perth South Council on March the 11th, asking for their lands to be returned to the township. And as a result of that, the township CAO was to prepare a report on the process, the cost, and the possibility of reversing the annexation. This report hasn't been brought forward to date. Also, during the MZO 30-day comment period, the Van Ness family again requested directly to Minister Clark that their lands be returned to the township. So essentially, where the factory was going to be located could be assumed may not be needed for another 70 to 90 years into the future. And so for their family, that's generations. That's generations of farmers who could possibly have their hands tied as far as making improvements to the land, such as putting up livestock facilities. And so it's very obvious why they would prefer their land to be in township territory. And they've made it quite clear that the reason they agreed was for the Xinyi plant. They didn't agree to the annexation in order to have their lands become general industrial. So as far as where do you go with something like that? How do you lobby councils to consider voting for reversal of annexation, reversal of the annexation? It's something that I really don't have an answer to. I really can't tell you what the sentiment is at Perth South Council or at Stratford Council to do something like that. But that might be an avenue that we could consider pursuing. Another avenue is the City of Stratford. They're doing a comprehensive review of the official plan. Now, the framework for this comprehensive review happens this fall. And then they will apply for budgeting, for budget funding for the comprehensive review to happen in 2022. And then they actually carry out the official plan comprehensive review next year. So what does that mean? Within the comprehensive review, they would have to designate the annexation lands as urban lands. And to do that, they actually have to prove that it will meet the provisions of the provincial policy statement requirements to actually do so. And if that is accomplished, then once they have that in the official plan, they have to change the zoning bylaws to change it from agricultural to industrial. Again, that allows for public comment and public pressure and ability to launch appeals to any decisions that are made. So the official route to do is wait for the Planning Act and apply pressure to the process, the council in the official plan and the zoning bylaw amendment. So, you know, it isn't over. They haven't had to prove their need to date, but they do at those two steps. Now, Mike. Well, before I go to Mike's comment on the planning report from GSP, what are some possible asks on this official plan review visioning, official plan review process that comes up? And just some ideas that I have jotted down is, number one, what about doing a visioning process during the city's examination? I mean, we've all argued what we don't want to be, what we don't want to happen. What is it that the residents of Stratford want the city to be? That's the ideal time to possibly ask for the inclusion of a visioning process. Another possibility, the inclusion of an ongoing education program for city residents, incorporate that right into the official plan. I mean, how difficult was it for everyone to know what to do? How do you approach council? How do you have input? How do you keep track of developments that are going on in the city? You know, being a delegate, the entire process of communicating with council and staff, I mean, it's like this grand mystery. 99% of people probably have no idea where to even start. And is it a good idea to have something within the official plan that requires the city to have an ongoing education program for how people can reasonably communicate with the city? And third sketching I have here is perhaps there's a possibility for an ongoing civic improvement exercise. This is this would be like an ongoing consultation, not just once every 5 years, but something that could be incorporated in the official plan, that the city has to maintain a closer contact with its residents on some of these big developments or big evolutions within the character of the city. So at any rate, that's something that would need to be considered this coming fall when they do establish a framework for this official plan review. Lastly, Mike mentioned the GSP Group Planning Justification Report of November 2019. That report was completely discovered by accident by my planning consultant in January of 2020. It's known as map number 12, which is a map of vacant industrial land inventory in Stratford. It arrived in his inbox, and his sharp eye just happened to know the notation that it was sourced from this GSP planning justification report with the municipal address exactly matching the lands where the glass factory was going to locate. And if it wasn't for that map landing in his inbox, I don't know if any of us would even be aware that this report even existed. So I made a Freedom of Information request February 2020 and was denied. So I did appeal that to the Information and Privacy Commissioner. 14 months later, this week, we got the mediator's report saying mediation is impossible, and I've requested adjudication. And adjudication, final decision can take up to a year and probably will be a year away. So it's a very protracted process, and just going to have to give more thought on how to possibly accelerate that. I don't understand how a 124-page planning justification report for the exact property where the plant was going to locate, delivered to the city solicitor 1 month before the annexation hearing, can be completely considered solicitor-client privilege. That's what we're going to find out. I think that's the exact kind of information, or at least portions of that report would be the exact kind of information that people like myself, other neighbors, and everyone in town would want to have access to so they could properly comment on the annexation that was happening. So we'll await that adjudication process and find out if they do have legitimate solicitor-client privilege, or as we found out through Mike's report, that solicitor-client's privilege may not always apply as ironclad as the city would want it to. So thank you, Mike Blockwell.
Thank you, Jamie. And you're a bulldog too, although I have an image of you as a badger as well here. So I'm seeing you and Mike side by side. One is a bulldog, one is a badger, helping to pull along the Get Concerned sled. Now, Jamie, there's a very specific question I'm going to ask you first. It's in the chat box, and then we're going to be a little more general. The very specific question from Jane is, who owns the land now? Were the farmers paid for this land? Were they paid by the city of Stratford? Who owns the land?
No, there was an agreement to purchase put in place very early on. This was before Matheson requested the MZO in November of 2018. Agreement to purchase was in place, but the land never transacted. There was never any dollars changed hands. So the 320 acres of annexation lands are still owned by the Van Ness family. and by the Walsh family.
Okay. Now, early in your presentation, Jane Marie asked this question, and I think you answered it, but can we request that the annexation be removed and restored to the original owners? And I think what you're saying is the official plan process is a way for that to happen. Is that correct?
I think firstly, political pressure is the first way for it to happen. And the landowners themselves are the ones to take the lead on that. And if they are still keen on that happening, then the community can support them, right? And political pressure seems to make things happen a lot more quickly than other avenues.
So
failing that.
No, go ahead.
Okay, failing that, within the official plan, you do have the opportunity to launch appeals to LPAT, Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. And beyond that, zoning bylaw amendments can be challenged to LPAT as well. The problem with the annexation was it was municipal act, and there was zero opportunity to challenge municipal act decisions at LPAT.
And so, Jamie, I think you make a very important point, which is this: because it's the family's property, they would need to make that invitation, and that you know, somebody could communicate to them that if they wished to make the request for the annexation to be reversed, that members of Get Concerned, it sounds like to me, would be willing to support them and be willing to put political pressure behind those demands. So, but it does have to start with the family.
That's a great conversation for Get Concerned Stratford to have, is how could we support that concept of reversing the annexation?
I don't think that's the hard part of the conversation, Jamie. I think the hard part is whether they want support. If they do, then I think you folks have learned a lot about how to bring political pressure to bear.
That's true, isn't it?
Jamie, there's lots of comments in response to what you said that aren't questions. There's lots of love being shown for you and the hard work that you've done. There's a comment somebody made that I'm going to read out a question, but it's not really a question for Get Concerned to answer, but it's a question to put out there. Richard says, so when do we start to organize to get rid of the current mayor and councillors? 2 years will fly by and they are entrenched. By the way, I don't think it's 2 years. I think it's more like 15 months. And even getting candidates is going to be a challenge. What's the plan? Well, what's the plan? It's not Get Concerned's plan. What's the plan? It's the community's plan. Jane says, so the farmers could not even sell their land to another farmer right now because of the annex standing order. Is that correct? Jamie, could they sell their land? My understanding is that the zoning doesn't restrict the sale of their land, but I'm not positive. What do you say?
Yeah, the MZO is still in place, but no, there's no restrictions on them to transact their land in any way. But what is the value of that land with a glass plant only MZO on it? I don't know if that decreases it or increases it, to be honest.
Okay, Jamie, thank you very much. Folks, we've got two things left on the agenda, and one of them is that, you know, the Water Watchers works with lots of communities, and we were very, very, very busy with you for several months, and things all kind of ended in a rush. And I just want to take take an opportunity here to point out some things that I think it's worthwhile for you to celebrate, and also to describe some of the reality of how we were able to work with you. You know, and the first thing to say is that, and you know this, but you won a very important victory in Stratford. And you faced a very big challenge when a corporation like Xinyi wants to take unsustainable amounts of water from the aquifer. You knew the whole community would suffer. And this is actually a fate's maybe the wrong word, but a situation that many communities in Ontario face right now from industries that are involved in extracting natural resources. You know, we're working with communities around Ontario where they're trying to take water or harvest trees or mine gravel, or they want to pave over farmland with highways or unsustainable expansion of the urban boundaries. You know, this development agenda really potentially could devour our future. And when Jamie was talking about food, Ken put in the chat box, we need those strawberries. And I think that's a metaphor, a deep metaphor. And there was something I heard recently, and Jamie, you may actually have been the person who said this to me. It said 6 inches of topsoil and rain is what makes it possible for human society to exist. It's not the highways, it's not the apartment buildings, it's not the parking lots, it's 6 inches of topsoil and rain. And we need that topsoil, we need that agricultural land. So we really have to resist these big extraction projects. And as you know, these corporations use their wealth and their power to influence politicians like Doug Ford, like Mayor Matheson. And those politicians, some politicians, help those corporations put profits over people. And in order to do that, they avoid public accountability by using tools like a minister's zoning order, or like an MZO. And you stop that here in Stratford. That's really quite significant. It has benefits for you and your community, obviously, that you stopped it. But people in communities across Ontario owe you their thanks. You put a spoke in the wheels of the MZO machine. You may be aware that Cambridge Council, for example, wants an MZO to approve a massive warehouse development that will affect the aquifer, the Grand River, local wetlands. Minister Clark hasn't given them one yet. And one of the reasons Clark hasn't given Cambridge an MZO yet is because you made him think twice. I think, you should give yourselves a hand. I don't know how in Zoom land we reach around and pat each other on the back, but that's a victory not only for you, but for other people in Ontario. Your campaign was a very successful campaign, and the Water Watchers has been pleased to support you. And many communities have the experience that you had, which is learning at the last minute that a big development threatens their home and their environment. And communities like you have to mobilize quickly, and you have to learn 2 things very fast. You have to learn the facts and the technical issues that are relevant to your situation. I don't know if you knew about greenhouse gas emissions before. I don't know if you knew about the Planning Act before, but you have to learn all that stuff, and very, very fast. The second thing you have to do very quickly is learn how to navigate and influence the power structure. For lots of communities, that's a new experience and something that they have to learn under pressure. But corporations like Xinyi and political leaders like Doug Ford, they do this a lot. And they've got a playbook, and they play from the same power playbook. Again, as I've heard Jamie Gibb say, they hush and rush. And they attempt to bulldoze or frustrate or intimidate local citizens and force something bad on the community. Now, the Water Watchers is familiar with this playbook because we've supported campaigns in struggles with many corporations, often big multinationals. I mean, the Water Watchers, we cut our campaign teeth opposing Nestle water bottling. That's how we got started. And by the way, the Water Watchers was a sharp end of the stick that helped force Nestle's to sell their North American operations. We're part of a broader movement, but we were the sharp end of the stick. And while we're familiar with this playbook, we're also familiar with consultants like Chris Pidgeon. Now, Chris Pidgeon was involved in the first Xinyi project in Goliaths. He was involved with your project, and now he represents a developer in Cambridge. It's always the same playbook. And, dealing with Chris Pidgeon, these people get hired, I think it's kind of like in a mercenary role, really. You're never really dealing with the owner. You're developing with somebody they've hired to represent them. And dealing with people like Chris Pidgeon is a little bit like playing whack-a-mole. They keep popping up, and you have to be opposed over and over and over again. Now, the environmental movement and the Water Watchers is part of that. We have our own playbook, and you saw it here in Stratford. And here's the important thing. You executed it to perfection. Now, I don't know how many of you are sports fans, and I'm nervous about wandering into sports territories, but there's one thing for the players, for the coach to give the players a plan, but the coach isn't on the ice or the field, the players are, and the players have to execute it. And you executed the plan to perfection. And again, you know, I just want to stop one more time and say congratulations again. Pat yourselves on the back some more. This is quite an accomplishment. Not everybody can pull off the game plan. Now, I want to be real with you for a minute. The Water Watch was able to be here to help you in the very beginning because the previous community to fight Xinyi, the residents of Guelph Aramosa, made a down payment. When we were done and that campaign was over, they made donations to put in the Water Watchers Pay It Forward Fund. And that's a fund that we reserve so that when a community calls us up and says help, we can start helping you right away without having to raise any money. Now, the Water Watchers doesn't have any core funding. There's nobody out there, there's no government that's going to give us money to fight them. We have to raise it from people who want to protect the environment. And we're able to do that because of the fundraising that we do. And the people in Guelph Aramosa set up a reserve fund so that when a community called us, if Xinyi came again, there would be resources to help you. In the last week of October, when the news first broke about Xinyi, Melissa Verspieten and Sharon Collingwood called me. I didn't know either of them before that. I immediately put them in touch with Susan McSherry. Now, I don't know if you've met Susan here online or not, but Susan led the first fight against Xinyi in Guelph Aramosa. And you know, Susan paid it forward. She joined your leadership group. She shared everything she knew about fighting Xinyi. And I'd just like to take a moment and do a shout out to Susan. I know she's in the audience somewhere. She's probably too shy to turn on her visual, but one day after the public health measures are done, we're all going to meet in Stratford and pat each other in the back and cheer each other on. But thank you, Susan, for paying it forward. Your leadership group formed and moved very quickly, and I know throughout this campaign you've shown them a lot of love. And I want you to know that the Water Watcher team was with them every day. And for the first 30 days of this campaign, it was 24/7 because you guys were hard up against it. All of us, your leaders, the Water Watchers, worked 24/7 for those first 30 days. And the Water Watchers could assign staff to this because we had the Pay It Forward Reserve Fund to draw upon. In the online community meetings that we had back in December, the community was very generous, and in total you made donations of $50,000, and that really fueled your campaign. Only $8,000 of that was for the Water Watchers. The rest went to campaign expenses, lawyers, experts, lawn signs, polling, leaflets, all the things we did. I'm pretty sure everybody feels that money was very well spent and that the result was worth it. In a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to make a pledge to the Water Watchers Pay It Forward Fund in order to help Water Watchers be able to answer the call for support the next time the community is staring in the face a multinational corporation and a development proposal that threatens their home and their environment. But before I do that, I'm going to ask Melissa and then Mike to say a few words about what it meant to them to have the Water Watchers support in the very beginning and to know that another community had paid for Water Watchers' initial support to you. Melissa?
Thanks, Mike. I just want to say first off, thank you to everyone that's here. Thank you to the steering committee. Just listening to Mike talk is so emotional, and it brings back everything that we all went through in those few months. I know when I reached out to Mike, I was a basket case because we were backed into a corner and things were happening so quickly. And I, for one, had never been involved in anything like this. So I had no idea what I was doing and no idea where to turn. So the support that I got from Mike and then Susan and then connecting all of us on the steering committee together, I can't thank everyone here enough for all of the wonderful, wonderful guidance that was given throughout that process. And also for the fact that when those calls were made, it was always kind of in the back of my mind that they didn't ask for anything to help and to give advice and to get started. And I happily would have given a fortune. I mean, they are worth their weight in gold. All of the advice, the people that they connected us with, David Donnelly, graphic designers, copywriters, Mike Bockwell's guidance as far as what to do next or what are our options, Susan's advice as far as fighting Xinyi specifically. It was just an incredible experience to be a part of, and to be a part of Stratford, and to see everyone just collect together down at City Hall and throughout the Zoom meetings. Like, it was just amazing, and it felt so great to be a part of that. And then it felt so great when it all just went away. But I do certainly miss seeing everyone like this. But I absolutely cannot put into words how fantastic the Water Watchers were, and how important and integral that was to getting to where we did in the end. Because I don't think that we would have made it. We were under such a time crunch that I really, really don't believe that we would have stood a chance if we didn't have that support and that guidance to start out with. So thank you to Mike and Danny and Megan and all of the behind the scenes Water Watchers crew. We're so lucky to have had you.
Well said, Melissa. Holy cow. These, I've been in lots of community group situations where there was no money and there was no organization. We had to do it all ourselves, and you couldn't do things. The problem in Stratford was that it was all happening so fast that if we'd waited until we'd raised enough money to buy lawn signs, we would not have had the result. We didn't have to wait because the Water Watchers were there, not just with advice and counsel and organization, but with money, with cash. They made sure that we didn't need for anything until we had raised it ourselves. And I can't say enough great things about Mike and Megan and Danny and all the crew there. They were wonderful. They made sure that we didn't stray off our basic goals. They made sure that we had the resources we needed, and Mike was pretty good at raising money at meetings when we didn't need money. I was very, very impressed, and I'm looking forward to a bunch of us all contributing to the Pay Forward plan, so that the next group that comes, and I've been in touch with 5 other groups already since we won here in Stratford, and uh, the enthusiasm, the fact that we could do it, meant these other groups didn't feel like they couldn't do it. They actually now feel like they can do it. They can actually change what City Hall wants, or change what the province wants, or change what the developer wants. And it's through the actions of Mike and Danny and their whole gang that we were able to do this so quickly. And if it happens again, I hope we can help them.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Mike. And it's been a pleasure to work together. And I know, those of us who are online, we haven't met in person, but I can tell from what you say in the chat boxes that you appreciate the leadership that Mike and Melissa and Jamie and Susan and Sharon and Doug provided. And they provided extraordinary leadership to your campaign, and they continue to do that, as we know from earlier, persisting around the closed meeting investigations, the MZO, and the annexation. And I know we appreciate them. It's okay to thank them again. It's okay to show some love in the chat box to your leadership. And I want to tell you this, in addition to all the things they've done in the past months, they've also already stepped up and primed the pump for the Pay It Forward campaign. Collectively, the members of your leadership team have already pledged $3,800. Now, their personal pledges are anonymous, but I can tell you, and I'm going to do the fundraising now, and I see there's some pledges starting in the box already, and we're going to ask you to make a pledge in the chat box, and we're also going to put the information there where you can make a donation and receive a receipt, and all of this money will go into our Pay It Forward fund. But I can tell you that some members of the executive pledged $1,000. And I'd like to ask, is there somebody who will match that pledge that has already been made by a member of the steering committee for $1,000? What I'd like to see is, will you contribute a matching or a multiple amount of the $3,800 that group has already pledged? And I know this feels a bit like PBS, folks, and it's like kind of like a telethon, and I'm saying something and you're thinking about it, and takes a while to see it show up in the pledge box. But is there anybody who would match the donation of one of the steering committee members and pledge $1,000? As you think about that, I can say to you that other members of the steering committee pledged $500. And I'm wondering if anybody would pledge 500, would match one of those donations and pledge $500 to the Pay It Forward Fund. I'd mentioned as well, Mike was kind of hinting at this, and I would be more explicit. Mike and Melissa, for example, are already pledging it forward. They've appeared at public online community meetings in Cambridge, where Cambridge Council is opposing the MZO, and where Chris Pidgeon once again is the consultant. Where are Peter, Paul, and Mary? I'm not sure what that means. Ken, maybe you have to say a little more in the chat box to us. So folks, I want to add it up. There's $250 on behalf of opposition to the Queen Trode Chancery development. Thank you, Gary. And I'd just like to ask you right now, folks, if you'll take a moment and make a pledge in the chat box that this for the Pay It Forward Fund, so that the Water Watchers can be able to step in and support other communities like we supported you. I think that's from Alan. Thank you, Alan, for your $200 pledge. I invite others to join Alan and Gary and Jane. Thank you, Jane, for your $100 pledge. And I see that Susan McSherry's pledged 1,000, and Marion L. Adler has pledged 100, and Leslie Walker's pledged 100, and Jillian has pledged 50. Thank you. And Cynthia said she's ready to pay it forward. So that's terrific, Cynthia. Tori's pledging 100, Linda's pledging 100, Jane Marie's pledging 30. Thank you very much, Jane Marie. Deborah's pledging 200. Thank you. We're at about 2,000 right now. Bill's pledged 200. Thank you. Jane Lynn, 200. I just don't, did I say Deborah? I can't be sure. Doug Tripp wants to add $200 to the pledge he's already made as part of the Get Concerned Stratford leadership group. I'm checking, my friends are letting me know how much that adds up to. Deborah says, well done. Sharon, another $200. That's terrific. Thank you, Sharon. We're going to put the pledge link, the donation link in the chat box again, and remind everybody that you do receive a tax receipt for that. Ted pledged $100. That brings us to $3,200. Barbara pledged 100, that's 33. Deborah, 100, that's 34. $400 more will take us to 3,800. Dorothy says 100. 300 more will mean that you're matching the contributions that the leadership group has made, and means that we'll have over $7,000 in our Pay It Forward Fund. So I'm just hoping that we'll get there's 250. Thank you, Marcia. Okay, folks, we're another $50 and we'll have matched the amount. I could donate a photograph, an image that Water Watchers can sell for funds. That's terrific, Leslie. I'm going to ask Danny to connect with you offline or through a private message so we can work those details out. Folks, with $50 more and we'll be at $3,800, matching the amount that your leadership group has pledged. And that'll be a terrific resource. And Brian donates the $50. Thank you very much, Brian. Now, there's others of you who may be talking to people in your household or looking to find a keyboard or thinking about how much you want to donate, and we're happy to accept those additional pledges. I'm going to move us on now to the next part of the agenda, which relates to the future. And I'm going to ask, there was something I wanted to say. Leslie's comment made me think of made me think of her. Maybe I want to make a concluding comment. And, you know, Leslie, you were part of the team that led the vigil at City Hall, which was so important and so moving through the coldest part of the winter. Thank you, Donna, for your $50 pledge. And Leslie, I remember you spoke in one of the meetings and you said, your backyard is my backyard and my backyard is our backyard. By the way, that reminds me of the Spanish saying, my house is your house. And maybe we have to learn how to say this in Spanish. But, you know, our backyard's part of our home. And Mother Earth provides our only home. And we have to protect her in order to continue being able to live in our home. I was in conversation with a woman who's Indigenous, and she said this: we have to work together to restore Mother Earth to her glory. I was quite moved by that. That sticks with me. And I think that what we've done together here in Stratford, what we'll continue to do together, and to do with other people in other communities by paying it forward and working in solidarity, is that what we're doing is restoring Mother Earth to her glory, so she can continue to provide us with the home that we enjoy and that we cherish together. This is a very special thing we've done together, and the Water Watch, myself and the Water Watchers will remember this forever, and we'll draw on the lessons that we learned here to help other communities. And I want to thank you on behalf of everybody who will work with in the future for the contributions you've just made to the Pay It Forward Fund and the solidarity you're showing with people in other communities and paying it forward in that way. Thank you. And while we're oriented towards the future, we sent around a survey which people completed. And we're going to just go through, I think we mailed the survey results out to you, but I'm just going to kind of highlight them a little bit, and then I'm going to circle back and just connect it to some of the things that Jamie was saying, because I think Jamie's giving us some direction around the future of the Get Concerned Stratford. And then we're going to have Melissa come back on and make some closing comments. So if we can move to the next slide. There were 237 people respond to our survey, which is terrific. Next slide. And I'm not going to read all the details to you. I'm just kind of reminding us of this. And most of it's about what happened in the campaign. A little bit of it's about the future. And I want to focus more on the future part. This is a demographics of who responded to the survey. Next slide. And what we found this interesting, we asked the question, when you first learned of the proposed glass plant, how did you rate the community's chances of survival? And not survival, how's that for a little Freudian slip, of the project not being approved. And 76% of you who answered the survey thought a win was unlikely. Next. And for those who said less than a 50% chance of winning, we asked the question, what was the moment that your opinion changed and you thought it was possible to stop the glass plant proposal? And for many of you, it was when the council actually finally took some action. Next slide. The moment that your opinion changed and you thought it was possible to stop the glass plant removal, the largest category was organizing related. It was when the community started to organize. Folks, I just want to share this with you. It's like momentum. Again, pardon the sports references on my part, but I am a Montreal Canadiens fan, and momentum matters. And when the community started to organize, people could feel it, and it changed the nature. And what organizing does is it starts to change the power relationship. At the beginning of the Stratford campaign, you were all on the short end of the stick. This was you had been hushed and it was being rushed upon you, as Jamie says, and I'm sure the community felt overwhelmed. And as you started to take action, you actually change the dynamics of what's happening and you start to change the direction of what's going on. Next slide, please. Was there a decisive moment when you think the mind of the mayor and council changed and which persuaded them not to approve the glass plant? And you can see that public pressure was the thing that you identified as being the decisive moment. Next slide. But and this is interesting and it matches my experience in other communities, the most common response is many people thought there wasn't one decisive moment. Rather, it was the incremental and persisting building of public pressure through all the means that created a collective wave of resistance. Again, if I could just become metaphorical for a moment, it's like when a volcano goes off. A volcano doesn't erupt lava all of a sudden. The pressure builds and builds and builds and builds, and then there's an eruption. And that's what you folks did so well. You built the pressure consistently. There was visible public opposition over the course of the whole campaign that grew in intensity, such that the council finally realized they had to find a way out. And they let the deal with Xinyi expire, and they let Xinyi leave town. Next slide, please. How important were each of the factors? No factor was significantly more important than the other. Again, it reinforces the idea that all of these together made a difference. I go back to my earlier comments that you folks were willing to follow a game plan and put on pressure on all fronts and it paid off for you. Next slide. Which of the activities were most satisfying to you? Interestingly, to me, the online meetings were. And that, folks, I got to tell you, this is a story I've told to other people. This is the very first time I've organized a campaign where I never set foot in the community. Typically, I would have been in a community too, like this, maybe 2-3 days a week, meeting people all the time in order to do the work that needs to be done. And you've taught me that we can organize online, and that online meetings can be a very effective way of engaging and organizing the community. So I thank you for that lesson. Next slide, please. What's the most important lesson you're taking from this that you'd like to pay forward advice to communities who demand that the municipal government take action to protect the environment? There's lots of things here, and this survey and the results, some of the results of this survey, we're going to share with other communities so that they can learn from your experience. And again, what stands out for me is organize, organize, organize. Next slide. Got a bit of a glitch here with the screen, Danny. Can we just go forward one more slide? Please go to the next slide. Okay, this is the future part. Would you like to see Get Concerned Stratford continue as a group? Almost 60% of you said yes. 36% of you said depends on what the issue is. A very, very small percent said not sure. So it's an interesting going forward. What is it all going to be about? What is the future of Get Concerned? Let's go to the next question, or the next slide, pardon me. John Kirk says, can we get copies of the slide set? The answer is yes. And we've sent it out before, but we'll send it out again. And what issues would you support Get Concerned getting involved with? Well, there's a whole bunch of things listed here, very specific things. Next, pardon me. But they come under the general category of the municipal governance, environmental issues, local planning, growth and development issues, and community visioning. Next slide. What's the number one issue for you? There's a lot of number one issues. Next slide, please. Okay, so just back up one slide, Danny, sorry. So I want to just make a suggestion to you, and I want to kind of build on what I heard, what I heard Jamie saying at the end of his presentation, that, there's something specific like the annexation that is something that you could provide support on, particularly if the family who owns the land would like to see that happen. But I want to pick up a bit on what Jamie was saying about visioning. And I think envisioning the city you want is really important. The one thing that I'm going to kind of maybe take Jamie's comment in a slightly different direction is, rather than ask the city to run a visioning process in which you participate, I suggest you run your own visioning process. That you organize the community, that you reach out and say, what kind of a community do we want? You'll be in charge of the process. It'll be a more independent and clearer vision of what you want. And by people building that together, you're going to build, I think you can build commitment to making that happen. And again, I'm going to give you just a little bit of unsolicited advice here, which is that I think it would be a mistake for Get Concerned Stratford to organize candidates to run for the election, because you'll instantly be seen as a partisan organization, and there'll be some candidates, the candidates you support will like you, and the candidates that you don't support won't like you. And if some of the candidates you don't like get elected, you're going to be in an adversarial relationship in a partisan kind of way. It's okay to be in an adversarial relationship with your council in order to have a certain kind of issue resolved or to have a certain vision achieved. But I don't think you want to be in a partisan position of having supported some candidates and not others. However, a way that I think you could influence the election in positive ways is to spend time between now and a year from now to develop a vision of the kind of city that you want, the kind of community you want to live in, the kind of progressive, green, environmentally sustainable, et cetera, community that you want to see. And create support for that in the community so that politicians who run on that agenda get elected and ones who don't. I'm going to go sideways and tell you just a little story. that comes out of our Nestle campaign. Nestle wanted to acquire a new well in the community of Elora, which is actually part of the municipality of Centre Wellington. And there's a group there called Save Our Water. We worked very closely with them, who wanted to prevent and did prevent Nestle from opening that well. They created so much public support for opposing Nestle having a well that you couldn't run for council without saying, I oppose the Nestle well. Everybody who ran for council opposed Nestle having the well. Everybody who got elected to council opposed Nestle having the well. The municipality lobbied the provincial government to create legislation that gave them a veto over any authority for a new well. That legislation was passed, and the city of, pardon me, the town of Centre Wellington is on record as making public statements that they oppose a well for Nestle and that they will never approve one. Now that's, although that's one specific issue, I hope that illustrates how you can create public support for a position which politicians want to and will support in order to get elected. And maybe I've said this to you before, and maybe there's some of you who either have been politicians or want to be politicians, and you may find my comment a little harsh, but here goes. For the most part, politicians don't lead parades. For the most part, they try and find a parade to get in front of. And you can create a parade to a community that is vibrant, that's livable. I'm looking at things that are on your chart here, that are progressive, that's green, etc. You can create that parade. You've got terrific people in your membership. You've got terrific people in the leadership. There are spots in the leadership for new people to come forward. And I think you could create a parade for a healthy, progressive, green, sustainable community. And so I think Jamie's giving us some really interesting advice by talking about visioning and talking about the city you want and the city you need. The last piece of my unsolicited advice, which I'm giving to the leadership and sharing with you, is that the time to start that work is next fall. There's some work you're doing to kind of wrap up the MZO and the closed meeting investigators report on the in-camera meetings. We're heading into summer. It looks like with the vaccination rates being where they are, the public health measures are going to ease and people are going to be able to get out and about again, and that the summer is a time for people to enjoy and reestablish those connections, and that the leadership can prepare maybe over the summer for you to come together in September and start to undertake that visioning in an independent way, and do it in a way that explicitly says a year from now, a year from September, in the fall of October 22, that this is a vision you want to see politicians run on, and those who support it will get your vote, and those who don't won't. Now that's a lot of unsolicited advice. I hope you don't hope you don't mind. I feel very good and very appreciative and you've been very generous tonight in pledging, and the Board of the Water Watchers will be very pleased to know that we've got, I think now, more than $7,000 in our Pay It Forward fund, so that we'll be able there to help other communities. I thank you very much for your attention tonight. I'm confident this is the last time, not the last time we'll meet each other. And I'm going to pass this back now to Melissa for some closing comments.
First off, thank you to everyone who showed up tonight, who supported us throughout the whole campaign, who made donations. We sincerely appreciate everyone's efforts. They were all needed to get us to the finish line. I'm sure you'll hear from us a bit throughout this summer, just with closed meeting information or anything that might arise, as Mike said. Otherwise, hopefully we can connect in the fall and maybe get some of these great ideas rolling. Thank you again for all being here. I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful summer. We're heading off for some holidays ourselves, so I'm excited for some time away with the kids, and I hope everybody has a fantastic summer and hope to see you all back in the fall.
The human brain can't stand still, even when it gets to the top of the hill. Just can't stop and admire the view. Always got to have something new. The human brain's an intelligent fool. Build you a hospital, build you a school. You wake up the very next day, the progress train took it all away. The progress train can demolish your town, selling us heaven when we're hellbound. When we're hellbound, fed by apathy, driven by greed, always running at top speed, going so fast you won't notice it till it's past. Doesn't give a damn about yesterday when you forget what it took away. You'll know the progress train roll right over you. Juggernaut hurtling down the road. You're not in control, you're part of the load. Running the lights, won't slow down. Get in its way and it'll run you down. The progress train is on a one-way track. Take you there, won't bring you back. And when you start singing, I'm all right, Jack. I'm all right, Jack. I'm all right, Jack. You'll know the progress train ran right into you. The girl in the red shoes had to dance. The progress train has to advance. Tables to turn, money to earn, bridges to burn. We never learn, got no destination, it'll go anywhere. Doesn't even know when it's got there. Got no beginning, got no end. Doesn't even care what's around the bend. Got to grow, got to change. Build up, tear down, rearrange. Got to move on, dirty or clean. It's an atom bomb. It's a washing machine. It's a love song. It sings, seducing you with things that ease your heart and please your mind. The passengers sleep and the driver's blind. A fire in his pants, he don't dance, no romance. They want you now. They want you now, they want you now, and they'll have you now. That's the progress train, and it's right over you.